All right, we're about to dive into one of the most critical, but maybe least understood, parts of how we create new medicines. It's a process that costs billions of dollars and can take well over a decade. And to really get our heads around it, we're going to start with, well, a kind of strange question.
Yeah, you heard that right. Popcorn. And I know it sounds a little silly, but trust me, it's the perfect way to understand the massive, massive challenge of developing a new drug. See, we're not just talking about making a snack here. We're talking about creating something that could be a life-saving medicine. So if you think about it that way, drug development is the whole journey, right? It's everything from finding that one in a million special kernel of popcorn to proving it actually works, proving it won't harm anyone, and then figuring out how to make millions and millions of bags where every single piece is absolutely identical and perfect, every time. And that is where this thing called CMC comes in. It stands for Chemistry, Manufacturing, and Controls. And you can just think of it as the master recipe. It's the rule book, the science of consistency. Because here's the thing, regulators like the FDA, they don't just care if your drug works. They need to know with absolute certainty that you can make it perfectly at a massive scale forever. And CMC, that's how you prove it.
And the stakes here are just unbelievably high. I mean, look at this number. The average cost to get just one new drug from a lab into the hands of a patient is a staggering $2.6 billion with a B.
And it's not just the money either. It's a marathon of time and effort. On average, it takes 12 years. 12. So let's break down exactly where all that time and all that money actually goes.
Okay, so everything starts at the very beginning. We're in the lab, and it all kicks off with just a single idea. These are the absolute earliest stages. And, it's also where most potential medicines fail right out of the gate. So here's a roadmap of that whole journey. You can see we start with discovery and lab testing. Then we move into the long, really difficult phase of human clinical trials. After that, we have to fight for regulatory approval. And then finally, we scale up for manufacturing and get it out to patients. Let's start right at the beginning. So in that first discovery phase, scientists are literally sifting through thousands, sometimes millions of molecular kernels, just trying to find one that has that special pop against a disease. Then, in what's called lead optimization, chemists get to work tweaking that molecule's recipe to make it stronger, more stable, and safer. And finally, in preclinical, they test it in cells and animals to prove it's safe enough to even think about giving to a human. And here's what's so important to understand. The CMC work, that master recipe, it begins right here. I mean, from day one. Scientists are already documenting the molecule's exact properties. They're starting to figure out a reliable, repeatable recipe to make it, and they're even thinking ahead about how it'll be delivered. Is it going to be a pill? An injection? All that starts now.
All right, so after years and years in the lab, if a drug still looks promising and, most importantly, safe, it moves into what is maybe the most critical and difficult phase of all, testing it in actual human beings. Now, these human tests or clinical trials happen in 3 main phases. Phase 1 is pretty small, and it's really just focused on one question. Is it safe? They test it in a small group of healthy volunteers. Phase 2, well, that's where you ask the big one. Does it actually work? This is tested in real patients, and honestly, it's the biggest hurdle. So many drugs fail right here. But if it passes, it moves to phase 3, which is this final, massive, often global trial to get that undeniable proof that it works and is safe. And you can probably guess what happens to the CMC challenge as these trials get bigger and bigger, right? It just explodes. Suddenly, you have to go from making a few grams of a drug in a lab to making kilograms of it for hundreds, maybe thousands of patients. And all the while, you have to ensure every single dose is perfectly identical and pure. This is the point where quality control becomes a total obsession. So let's just imagine for a second. You've spent nearly a decade and $1 billion. You've somehow made it through all 3 phases of clinical trials, and your drug actually works. You must be done, right? Nope. Now comes the paperwork. And when I say paperwork, I mean a literal mountain of it. The final submission that goes to regulators like the FDA is often more than 100,000 pages long. 100,000. It has to document every single thing that's been done for the last 10 plus years. And here's the crucial part. A huge chunk of that 100,000-page document is pure CMC. It's the recipe.
Regulators will comb through every detail you see here. How do you make the pure drug substance? What's the exact synthesis route? What's the impurity profile, which is basically a list of all the tiny burnt bits you have to control? And you need years of stability data to prove it doesn't go stale on the shelf. Every single detail has to be perfect.
Okay, so let's say you do it. You succeed. The regulators approve your 100,000-page rulebook. The drug is approved. The work's not over, though. In fact, in a lot of ways, it's really just beginning. And this is why. Making a few kilograms of a drug for a clinical trial, that's one thing. Making tons of it, day in and day out, just supply the entire world, that is a completely different universe of complexity. Your process, which might have been a little flexible before, is now completely locked in and validated. The goal isn't just to supply a trial anymore, it's to supply the world. So, after the drug is launched, the CMC team switches into something called Lifecycle management. What does that mean? It means if you want to change anything, and I mean anything, a new supplier for a raw material, a different piece of equipment, even a tiny tweak to the recipe, you have to file yet more paperwork with regulators and prove it doesn't change the final product one bit. The work truly, truly never stops. So after seeing that entire journey, from a lab kernel all the way to a global factory, you can really start to see why this is all so important. CMC is like the invisible science that actually turns a promising idea in a lab into a real, reliable medicine you can hold in your hand. You know, these are the challenges that literally keep CMC scientists up at night. The simple fact that chemistry just behaves differently when you go from a small flask to a giant factory vat. The nightmare of controlling tiny, unwanted impurities, proving the drug stays good for years, navigating different rules for every single country, and documenting it all. Because in the world of medicine, there's a simple rule. If it wasn't written down, it didn't happen, period. So, the next time you see a simple pill, just take a second to remember the invisible universe of complexity behind it. That's CMX. It's the quiet, unsung hero of medicine. It's what ensures that the medicine you take is the exact same perfect medicine that someone on the other side of the world is taking. It really is the science of perfection, at scale, forever. And without it, modern medicine just couldn't exist.